And humans, reap my wrath. When I, Zorak, ruled the earth. On the third day, a dark cloud approached from the west. A cloud of swarming locusts. And a mantis was thus spawned. I, Zorak.
Hey guys, this is a video I made in the past, and I just wanted to try and redo it and be a little more concise. But I'm trying to establish a symbolic connection between Saturn and bugs or insects. And I know that sounds kind of strange, but if you bear with me, I think I might be able to make it slightly coherent. And I'm starting off with this meme called the bugman, right? It's this meme that was floating around, and it's this sort of terminology that got slapped on to conspiracy adjacent crowds. I mean, not onto them, but they would use that as terminology. And it reminds me a lot of the whole clown world thing. And it's funny how both those terms came into being referring to a certain kind of system or a certain kind of demoralized person or something. And I had previously ascertained clowns and the insect thing as both elements of a Saturn symbol. And I just think it's interesting how those ended up being kind of euphemisms that were put into the culture. Anyway, so to start off, I mean, we got Klaus Schwab or whatever his name is, the whole "you will eat the bugs, you'll own nothing and be happy," that kind of stuff. There's some real life situations that people got that from. Like, I think they were trying to make it trendy or whatever to get your bug protein or get your protein from bugs, and they were trying to repackage this obviously lower standard of living in this like fancy, cool, trendy way, and nobody was buying it. And obviously people kind of went hyperbolic. I don't know if this guy really said you'll eat the bugs, you know, but there is some element of truth there. Like, there were people advocating for that, and that has a lot of overlap with the whole bugman thing in general, not just because of the bugs, but what eating the bugs kind of represents. So a bugman is sort of an internet meme, and it's a person who's like a slop consumer, a mediocrity enjoyer, a spiritually flattened person, or kind of a passive modern human, right? I'll get into why bugs. There's a lot of stuff that has the overlap with the Saturn thing. So when you think of bugs, one of the things you think about is sort of like anonymous labor, like you're a cog in the machine, which has a lot of overlap with the Saturn stuff and as well, as far as like when you think about like clockwork and the cogs and mechanics and technical nature of like clockwork machinery. It's very reminiscent in some sense symbolically of like ants in an anthill, but bugs also being like a hive mind, right? So no individuality, no creativity, no innovation, no real spark, right? You're kind of just a economic unit or whatever for the system has made you out to be. There's also another component to the bug thing, and that's most of them are matriarchies, right? So ants and bees and probably many other insects have a societal structure that is a matriarchy, so they all worship a queen. And I think that's appropriate for a number of reasons. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I kind of want to lay this all out there up front. The matriarchy thing, if you watch some of my other videos, I think there is a feminine quality to this Saturnian thing. And to be very brief about it, it's something along the lines of like a soft tyranny or a rockabye baby lullaby kind of tyranny. Think sort of overprotective mother, that kind of thing psychologically. We'll get more into that later. This is from a game called Schedule 1, and I played it forever ago when it came out, and it was just some drug dealer game, and this is graffiti that was put in there by the developers, and this is meant to portray, obviously, a kind of bug man. It's like a dude with a centipede body, and it says, "I will build no dynasty, I will consume corporate slop, soy juice and insect protein will fuel me, and gentrification equals monochrome utopia." I don't necessarily know what to make of the gentrification thing, but first off, the whole I will build no dynasty, right? That's sort of like an economic angle to look at the Bugman. They want to purposely kind of hinder prosperity, economic prosperity specifically, so that you have no autonomy, you have no leg to stand on, you have no property, and you're way less likely to have a family, which kind of leads into like anti-natalism and that kind of stuff as well. There's something to be said about people being economically kneecapped on purpose, whether it's through immigration and lack of opportunities, or devaluing the currency through inflation or some kind of taxation. That's a big part of ruining someone's chance at having, you know, a dynasty, if you want to put it that way, like a family legacy and prosperity, and basically just their own economic autonomy. I will consume corporate slop. So again, a big part of what the Bugman was culturally and on the internet and stuff, and that's part of the meme, is someone who just is like a pig at the trough, you know what I mean? They enjoy the mediocre. They just think about how ants march in a line, and they don't express like self-awareness or individuality. They just kind of do what's in front of them and use what's in front of them. So, you know, oh, here comes the new 17th remake of a game that was good 20 years ago, or a movie that was good 20 years ago, and let's just eat that up and not really think about it. Let's just not think about the lack of creativity or the lack of life that these mediocre corporate projects that get churned out really represent. Just eagerly awaiting them is sort of symptom of a demoralized person. So a Bugman is really just a demoralized person. That's how I think about it. Soy juice and insect protein will fuel me. So again, like I said at the beginning of the video, there is some people who are advocating for the commoners. Like, part of being a Bugman and the whole no dynasty thing economically is like you have no status, right? You're a commoner. And not that I see working class people that way, but they do. And oh, you'll get your, you know, bug ration and your soy juice and your Soylent Green or whatever, and you'll get your rations and perform your economic function or whatever they want for you, and you basically won't think about anything, try to build anything, change yourself, or anything like that. To go into like the people say, for example, the whole red meat thing, they don't want people to have access to like red meat or good food, and people say that they're releasing ticks to make people allergic to red meat, and who knows if all that stuff is true. But if they judge this stuff as unsustainable, it's convenient that we're all the ones that pay the price, and then they're still going to, you know, they see themselves as a different class, and that they get to enjoy these things, and everyone else has to eat the bugs and drink the soy juice. So in short, a Bugman is sort of just a collectivized person, a person who's lost their sense of individuality, or I just call it like their spark, their passion. They have a managed or a passive existence. It's someone who kind of prefers comfort over heroism, a sort of hive psychology, right? So consensus. Oh, this is what the reviewers say, or this is what the likes on the post say, and this is what the ratio says. So, you know, this is what the hive has suggested is good or true or valuable or cool. Therefore, that's what I'm going to think. So again, I mean, that just ties into a collectivized person, or someone who's not really thinking like a true individual. And I'm not necessarily against consensus, or that consensus automatically means something bad, but I shouldn't even have to put those disclaimers in. I'm sure you guys understand that. Anyways, a Bugman is just a sort of spiritually domesticated, spiritually neutered kind of person. And let me say this, I'm not really the kind of guy that I would never call someone a Bugman. I've always avoided terms like that. I don't like calling people NPC. I don't like calling people sheeple. I don't like calling people Bugmen. I'm never the one to do that, because I don't see myself as some elite above everyone else kind of person. And I understand the frustration that might make you think that or feel that or say something like that, because people can be really hostile or stupid or cruel or whatever, and sometimes it's maddening, and you get frustrated and angry with people. But I've just never been one to really kind of co-sign that dehumanizing language. It's just not for me. I'm not really on board with it. This is just me talking about the archetype of what the bugman is and how I feel like it overlaps with a system that I call a Saturnian system, or a death culture system, or a death-oriented mind, or something like that. Saturn is just sort of my umbrella term for a lot of this stuff. I mean many different things by it. We're going to talk a little bit about the maternal thing and the collectivism thing. A long time ago, when Facebook, I believe, first introduced Facebook groups, right? So you have Facebook group, and we'll all pretend to be ants in an ant colony, worship the queen together. I get that they're trying to be funny, and I think there were people just joking around pretending to be ants, like in a comment section. Like they'll just type as if they're marching or lifting something, and it was meant to be funny or whatever, and that's fine. I'm of the impression, for example, when Facebook changed its name to Meta, and what the word meta meant or sounds like in Hebrew, and what the logo is, and the picture of Saturn in the background when they announced the name change, I just don't think they do stuff like this on accident. And I think it's just one of those situations where, whether it's intentional or not, there's a bit of a synchronicity, if you want to call it that, happening, where they're showing this Facebook group ad as everyone pretending to be ants. And I would argue that they did that on purpose, not to be, and they're not trying to be funny. I think they're essentially passing a little bit of code, if that's how you want to put it. But ants are path followers, collective organisms. Like I said, anonymous labor, if you want to think about it economically. You're a non-individual entity moving along a predetermined route. And the reason that there's a maternal component to this is, I mean, in the context of the insects, is because they have a matriarchy. But why I think Saturn has a maternal component to it, and I don't want to really unpack that too thoroughly because I have other videos that do that. But like I said, it's a sort of situation, like I said, like an overbearing mother. It's tyranny 2.0. It's like a comfortable tyranny where you sort of like it, and you're just demoralized and emotionally flatlined, and you don't really like feel angry or sad. You're just kind of stable, and everything's comfortable for you. I have a lot of other references that establish that Saturnian maternal component further, but like I said, I don't want to really unpack that too much in this video. I just think this is one of those situations where different iterations of Saturn symbolism contain components of another iteration of Saturn symbolism. Like, for example, when I talked about dragons and vampires, it's like, okay, those sound like totally different things, but then when you really look into it, there's a lot of overlap there. I thought this painting was crazy. And it's funny, we were just talking about Facebook, right? We were just talking about Facebook. Well, what does their logo look like now? Oh, it looks like that Ouroboros infinity loop 8-figure time cycle kind of thing, right? And I thought it was interesting that this dude, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, it's like Escher, Escher. You've probably seen his paintings in the past. It's like those ones where it's like stairways that look illusory, and they're going up and they're going down, and there's just like a building full of staircases. But he also painted this, and you have these ants on this Mobius strip thing. And that's funny, again, that's also what Facebook's logo is now. And this is kind of my point, that I was just trying to explain how different iterations of Saturn symbolism end up overlapping with each other, because now we have two Saturn symbols in the same picture, and they're both hammering home the same kind of point. And it's just sort of like endless reoccurrence, or a looping system, or no true escape. And there's this inevitability that kind of goes along with that. And when you think about inevitability, there's a whole kind of psychology that comes along with that, right? Like a cynicism or a nihilism, or it's a pointless thing, or a doom kind of perspective on things, and a jaded attitude. But talked about that in many other videos. You see, the ants are sort of like path followers. They just kind of go forever. It's sort of like when people say you can die before you're dead, you know, and I think even biblically speaking, they say watch out for the second death, right? And I mean, I know they're saying your physical body dies and then you're going to go into hell, or you're going to have that afterlife, but in principle it's sort of similar to the notion of someone being so lost and not self-actualized and a product of a system, or they were given a certain ideology, they were given a certain set of values, they were given a certain mind, they were given a certain heart, and they don't really ever think about, they were given an identity that wasn't really of their own choice. The system made you what it wanted you to be, and until you take a step back outside of yourself and take a look at yourself and your environment and how you're thinking and how you're acting and take a real inventory of that, you are kind of on this automated course, perhaps by the machinations of people that we don't even know, or these entities that we can't even comprehend, or something like that. So this image to me was just crazy. It's sort of like creatures trapped marching on an infinite system. Just to get back to the Facebook thing, obviously, beyond just it being called Facebook groups, this has a ton of overlap with technology itself, which is why you see it sort of a lot of this like type of language in technology company advertisements and stuff about like, let's erase boundaries or let's all connect, because they are in the business of connecting people. But it kind of means more than that when you really think about it. And if you think about it in its most extreme case, if we're all jacked into this technological system, eventually, you know, people worry about the end game of that being sort of like a matrix, or everyone, you know, Neuralink, imagine everyone has an actual literal physical implant and they're all jacked into like the same cloud and we're all more or less sharing the same brain. And they're kind of already doing that, but that's just a more absolute form of it, a more physiological, a more ironclad version of it. Because if they're obsessed with order and stability and getting the world they want it to be, they by virtue of even creating an environment like that, they have to reduce the individual. They have to reduce human autonomy, because that's a avenue for chaos. Because a person with free will can do anything at any time. Like, you could get up and do whatever you wanted right now. You could wake up a different person tomorrow if you really wanted. There's nothing actually stopping you from doing that. A system doesn't like that unpredictability. They don't like it psychologically, philosophically, literally, in technology. So they're trying to culturally kind of consolidate everyone, right? And that's kind of what being a bugman is sort of about. But beyond that, technologically, it gets a little scarier, because it's beyond psychological suggestion at that point, and it's more like technological certainty or something like that. I hope that makes sense, guys. And I did a whole video on Facebook and their Saturn symbolism stuff. So they fly a certain flag, they let you know who they are, they let you know what the technology is and what it's about, if you have the eyes to see it, in my opinion. But, you know, they're all about connection and integration and collectivized identity and digital immersion. Humans being reduced into manageable, networked units. So everything's just sort of flattened and standardized, right? You see how a lot of this is dehumanizing, right? The whole low status of you will eat the bugs, loss of prosperity, like that picture said, you'll have no dynasty. You're a swarming mass amalgam ant in a colony. You're industrially efficient. Like, there's all this stuff is very dehumanizing. Even the term bugman is dehumanizing. So eat the bugs kind of turns into this psychological, accept your societal reduction. You know what I mean? Accept your place. Go ahead and eat the bugs. And I think on some level, people understand this, which is why memes gain. If a meme is truly organic and it's not astroturfed or whatever people say, it obviously gets cultural momentum, because people feel it and resonate with it and understand it on some level. Even if they just think it's funny, at least at face value, there's something else going on there. And I mean, we all know where the word meme even came from. It's like mimetic from, I think, Dawkins, right? He was saying it as sort of like cultural DNA or a cultural imprint or something like that. I don't want to get too derailed on that, but yeah, you guys get the idea with the Facebook, and it's like a hive and it's a community, which is community is such a dirty word to me nowadays, because it's a word people slap onto stuff to act like they are talking, they speak for other people, and it's a way to talk as like a collective or a hive mind. And I'm not saying community has to be bad, but it's just been so misused and bastardized in modern society. It's become sort of a dirty word for me. Yeah, I think corporations love this kind of messaging because, one, they want if you want to be not cynical about it, I think they want people to feel belonging to their brand, right? They want to feel, oh, you're part of the Walmart family when you shop here. You know what I mean? Like, they want you to feel that kind of sense of belonging. And obviously that's, I don't know, kind of silly, but I think there's something more nefarious there as well, other than just them trying to create a brand that people feel like they belong to. So you just have a sort of heroic individuality versus this sort of frictionless participation. And this is one of the things that I've talked about in previous videos. People like to point at this or that as what's the main reason why the world is the way that it is, and why things seem like they get worse, and why we're on the trajectory that we're on. And there's a lot of different explanations. Some things contribute more than others, and it's not a single answer issue. I mean, one of the absolute, I'd probably say top 5 reasons why things are the way that they are is because, like I just said, it's frictionless. It's because people are comfortable, and it's also a lack of courage thing. So I think as long as people are comfortable enough, I don't really feel like they would rock the boat and shake up the status quo or whatever. And that's sort of part of the modern world in some sense. You almost have to artificially inject struggle into your life. Like, I don't have a lifestyle that would keep me in shape. I don't have to go and hunt for my food. So I have to literally artificially introduce hardship into my own life just so through exercise and dieting and stuff. I have to create friction where society has completely alleviated it because it's hurting me. It's killing me. The comfort is killing me. And that's sort of what this maternal thing turns into. It's like they love you to death, quite literally. I hope that makes sense, guys. Just real quick, I'm not going to keep yapping on this too much, but there's this commercial, right? So there was a car company called Saturn. You could get they're out of business now, but there is a situation. There's a bunch of different things that I had independently of each other established or discovered to be different iterations of Saturn symbolism, right? So you have the clown, you have agriculture, now you have insects. And it's so funny, like I said, independently of each other, through different means and different avenues, I discovered those things to have some weird Saturn component to them. And then the Saturn car company has had commercials with all of those things. It's just it's one of those situations where I really, I don't feel like I'm reaching. It's like, why would this company have these commercials for all these different things that I feel like were Saturn things? And and the car company's name is Saturn. Anyways, let's just play it. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but...
Introducing the tough, versatile Saturn View. At home in almost any environment.
It's just showing the Saturn car as part of the ant colony. I'm not going to add too much to that. So this is from a manga. The horror artist, Junji Ito. So to set the scene a little bit, this guy, he goes into this building and he meets up with all these communists, right? So he's like bugs. He's seeing them as something different, and they're like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "Nothing at all. We're comrades brought together by Marx. You're Oba-kun, right? We're in the middle of a lecture on his economics. Take a pamphlet and sit down." So you have this. We talked about collectivization and egalitarian and lack of individuality and autonomy. And a lot of that translates into a communist-esque political system, obviously. And I'm not saying necessarily Soviet style communism or whatever. I'm not a political guy, but there's principles at play here that have some obvious overlap with a communist sort of political arrangement. I'll just say that. But I think it's accurate that he sees these guys as bugs and they're all there to talk about Karl Marx. And I don't know. I'm not going to make it political. The left-wing stuff has its place. Corporations are an issue. Obviously, I don't need to insert those disclaimers, but I think you know what I'm talking about. And this is the important part that I got from this, right? So they give him a pamphlet, and he says, I felt there was something inexplicable at the bottom of human society, which was not reducible to economics. My heart was totally unmoved. And I think that is what we're missing. It's funny because when people think about, even in the context of this video, right? How did I start off this video? Oh, I was talking about bugman as a sort of economic thing, and oh, they're a corporate slop enjoyer, and they love mediocrity. They're a consumer kind of thing, right? It kind of lacks this spiritual component to it. At least that's my feeling, how most people interacted with the meme of bugman, right? It lacks this self-reflection. It lacks this spiritual level of analysis. And that's just in the context of bugman. And I've talked about this a million times on my channel. I'm saying we need to shift our perspective to something else in all domains, not just the context of this meme or insects or whatever. But I don't believe in economic observations. I don't believe in political observations. I believe in, I guess, just for lack of a better word, a spiritual observation. That's where I think the primary perspective should be derived from, or a psychological one at least. And there's a reason for that. I think it increases accountability, and I think there's more truth there, and I think it's more actionable. I think it'll actually create more change. I'm not going to harp on that for too long, but I've talked about that many times, and that's kind of why I focus on what I do on this channel and why I talk the way that I talk. I'm not really like a systems-oriented person. I'm not an economic-oriented person. I'm not a politically-oriented person. Not only because I think it's not the true causal factors of why things are the way that they are. I think things are the way that they are is because people are the way that they are. That's why that's the honest answer for why I think shit is going the way that it is because we are the way that we are. And I'm not saying there is no system or no economic factor or there is no sabotage or there is no conspiracy. I'm not saying that. They're a part of the equation too. You know, they are the way that they are spiritually. My point is, I don't look at things economically or politically because I don't think that is where the true cause of our manifested reality is at. So he says, my heart was totally unmoved. And earlier when he said bugs, like he sees them as insectoid entities for whatever reason. And this is sort of a theme in the whole story. I forget what it's called, honestly. All this stuff that I'm showing you guys is stuff that I've had for actual years and years and years. So I don't remember. I think it's called No Longer Human, actually. I think I just remembered it mid explanation of how I don't remember. I believe that's what it's called. But he sees this kind of stuff all the time. And I just thought it was appropriate that he saw these communist type people as these weird insectoid kind of guys. And there's a line here at the end of the story, which I think is interesting. I realized at that moment that there are some whose dread of human beings is so morbid, they yearn to see monsters of ever more horrible shapes. Painters who had had this mentality after repeated wounds at the hands of the apparitions called human beings plainly saw monsters in broad daylight, which is a super like artistic and dramatized way of thinking about things. This doesn't necessarily make it a secular perspective, but and also in the background, you see he's also putting Saturn in there. I mean, that's Kronos eating the person right there in the background. But basically, the idea is these horrendous, grotesque imageries and these villainous characters that we all see are all derived from either, God forbid, personal wounds at the hand of apparitions called human beings. So their own personal life, human beings did something so vile to them that they saw them as sort of not human anymore, like that they're a monster. It just adds to the whole idea that these fictional stories are trying to tell us something about ourselves and about people and human nature and all this stuff, because these people are derived, even if the imagery is dramatized and grotesque and abstract and weird and very artistic, it's all derived from, you know, like the Bible says, the issues of life flow through the human heart. So it's all derived from observations about ourselves, right? And other people. And the only anecdote I would make about that is I don't know if it's only that. I wouldn't say that the spiritual reality is only personification or dramatization. But if you're not a religiously oriented person, I think you should at least be able to appreciate it from that level or from that perspective. I think it's both. So I'll just say that. I hope that makes sense. If all these grotesque imageries are derived from the personal experience of the artist or their life or whatever, and their encounters with other people, and they started to see other people as actual monsters, that's what I'm kind of saying. That's really what's at the core of everything. I think the world is the way that it is because people are the way that they are. So where does that tell us where our focus should be? Well, why are we the way that we are? And that's something a bugman would never consider. They don't have that agency. They don't have that. You know, we talked about the Mobius strip, right? One of the things you can think about it, one of the ways you can think about it, is like it lacks transcendence, right? It's a closed circuit. And there's a lot of different ways you can think about that psychologically. I talked about it in my MMA apology video, how, you know, a revenge cycle kind of perpetuates itself, kind of like a Mobius strip, and the only way you can get out of it is to do something transcendent like apologize or forgive. And principally, this is a similar situation. I don't think we can change things until you can kind of, you know, when I was on drugs forever ago, when I was a teenager or when I was a young man, one of the key moments that was game changing for me, and it sounds so obvious, but it's not, at least not to the person that's in the middle of it. You don't realize how crazy you're being until you can take a step outside of yourself. And that's sort of that's sort of transcendent, right? The way that you are is a sort of Mobius strip. It's a sort of closed circuit psychologically. And you have to have that moment of like Godsmack outside of yourself and to see things for what they are. And to get back to my own personal anecdotal experience, I had a situation where there was someone I was involved with and she was taking drugs and I was taking drugs. She got into some harder stuff. I'm not trying to get too personal, honestly. I feel a little inconsiderate even talking about it. The point is, until I saw how things were changing for her and like what it was doing to her family from the outside, I didn't really think about it in terms of myself. I was like, oh, this is what I'm doing to myself and this is what I'm doing to my family. It sounds so obvious and self-evident, but I just couldn't get it until I was looking outside of myself. Or looking inside of myself, depending on how you want to think about it. Anyways, this clip is just kind of a stupid, funny thing, but I think it's kind of speaks to the conspiratorial angle of this stuff.
Race of giant space ants. It's difficult to tell from this vantage point whether they will consume the captive Earthmen or merely enslave them. One thing is for certain, there is no stopping them. The ants will soon be here. And I, for one, welcome our new insect overlords. Like to remind them that as a trusted TV personality, I can be helpful in rounding up others to toil in their underground sugar caves.
I just think it's funny that the newscaster basically volunteers himself to sell out his own kind to the insectoid aliens. You know, some people would take that to its extreme, like literally, like we're going to get into briefly. I'm not really too much into aliens and UFOlogy and stuff like that. But it's worth bringing up because we're talking about the bug stuff. Perhaps if you are familiar with it, like one of my strategies for how I figure out an archetype, and in this case you have this insectoid bugman archetype culturally, is I look at all the different places it shows up and try to look for the common denominator, right? So if there's something in UFOlogy that people have derived about these insectoid or mantis aliens in their behavior or in their goals or whatever, whether it's real or not, you don't need to literally believe that these mantis things are real, but just the fact that they're part of like a psychology, or they're part of the culture, or a part of the ethos, and that they have like attributes about them, I wouldn't write it off as like total nonsense, is what I'm getting at. So if there's people who are more familiar with that sort of mantis thing in the alien sense, then they can go ahead and chime in, and I'll kind of see if there's overlap. But I'm not, like I said, I'm not too well read in all the alien stuff, and we'll get into that in a second. Like I said, I just think it's interesting how there's a guy on the news, and that clip is very conspiracy oriented, but you could think about how the news is sort of contributing to getting people to be bugmen, or to be aligned with a lifestyle or a perspective or worldview that the system wants them to have. It's propaganda, right? There's a lot of talk about aliens, right, lately. You know, people will say Project Bluebeam, fake alien invasion to unite the world, and Ronald Reagan videos where he's talking about the unity of mankind could only do it through some existential threat like aliens. And we've all seen that kind of stuff, right? We've all heard about that kind of stuff. And that makes, I mean, who knows? Maybe that's something that could happen. I have no idea. But it's so interesting how the system right now is releasing these alien files, and people are getting disclosure and all this kind of crap. I mean, I haven't read it or watched any of it, but it's like it all feels very weird, because obviously we live in a situation where the government and the system is controlled and not to be trusted. So, I mean, how can you trust disclosure as something that's legitimate and not just like another angle that they're working, or another part of their game that they're playing, right? And you have a situation here too where it gets even stupider. Like ESPN is pulling up all the aliens from the government leaked alien file and like ranking them on their basketball playing ability. You know, right? So they got the Nordic and his 7 feet tall, and they're ranking like, you know, his probably his dunk and shit. And there's just a certain, and that's fine. Like, I'm not necessarily opposed to finding the humor in things, but it's just interesting how things that are supposedly supposed to be serious are all just reduced to jokes. And I've talked about that before in my clown video. I'm just bringing this up because culturally right now, there's a lot of talk of aliens, and the reason I'm bringing it up in this video specifically is because mantis or insectoid aliens are one of the named races of aliens that are supposedly involved with human beings.
First comes the humming, a low vibration felt more than heard, then a strange tingling sensation spreads throughout the body. Many witnesses report feeling their hair standing on end, like static electricity building up all around them. Then something is in your mind.
What I think is most interesting about that clip, this is someone talking about their encounter with some alien, I think a mantis specifically. I think the last line is pretty interesting. You know, and suddenly there's something in your mind. And I've often talked about this, and I don't want to retread the same point and bore you guys to death, but we've talked about how I've speculated, and people have speculated, that ideas and feelings that people have are actual life forms, and they're not. So when you feel, the example I always give is when you feel a spirit of anger, when you feel anger, you're actually possessed by some actual entity or life form that's trying to live through you or act through you so that it can exist in our dimension. So anger, suffering, or anger or violence doesn't come through the veil until it can possess you and get you to do a violent act. Which, again, that could be a dramatization or a personification of stuff, but it could also not be. I just think it's interesting how he's saying you feel it in your mind.
Killing my children and praying mantis, and that's it.
I mean, I don't know. One of my friends just sent me this. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, obviously this woman is like probably like a tweaker or like a drug addicted person, but just the fact that both those things are said right next to each other, killing my children, and then the mantis. Praying mantises might have a thing of killing their children, or vice versa, or maybe they're the ones that when they breed, they like bite the head off of their partner or something. There's a lot of the same way I was deriving literary or symbolic value from real world behavior of insects like bees and ants. I'm sure you could do the same thing with mantises, but I'm just not an entomologist or whatever, or a bug expert. I'm sure there's something there.
The honeycomb, the ideal structural shape. The honeybee has been amazingly successful in technical and mechanical things. An area, by the way, in which man has done very well indeed. But the bee seems to be successful in another area where man seems to be failing. In the bee society, there are no labor management problems, no strikes, there's no unemployment, there's no crime, no juvenile delinquency, no rebellion against authority. No one can doubt the efficiency of the bee society. We must recognize, however, that this is an utterly ruthless efficiency. There is no unemployment because bees practice total and absolute population control geared to economic conditions.
He's giving all these examples. There's no unemployment or juvenile delinquency. There's no room for individuality. There's no room for outliers, or there's no room for variables, right? So everything fits a specific role. Everything runs like clockwork, like machinery, like I was saying at the beginning of the video. Like I said, if a system is so concerned with order, this is a sort of desirable outcome for them. So they want to make people a certain way, and that's part of what the bugman is.
An utterly ruthless society. They are also aware that man is not instinctively locked into such a behavior pattern. And so they propose to substitute force for instinct. No thoughtful person could possibly give assent to such a proposal, unless first he had accepted two major tenets of atheistic materialism. One assumes that man is merely a highly developed animal, and that he differs from the lower animals only in degree, not in kind. The second assumes that there are no absolute standards of right and wrong, and that what standards we do have are largely artificial, unrealistic, and unworkable. In other words, it is assumed that there is no behavior pattern designed to meet the special needs of man. So man is free to develop his own standards or even borrow a behavior pattern from the animals. But is it true that man has been left without a standard of behavior? History clearly indicates that every civilized society has been based on certain moral and ethical principles which are contained in the Ten Commandments. Now, many people laugh today when the Ten Commandments are mentioned. They seem to feel that they're outmoded, that they're not relevant to the needs of modern society. Is there anything wrong with this as a pattern of behavior? Think what the world would be like if every person were locked automatically and irrevocably into this pattern. There'd be no war, no crime, no racial problems, no poverty. You could disband your armies and your police, and we could take all the locks from our doors, and man could devote his time and attention to that which is constructive. Our trouble stems from the fact that man is not following this pattern. In fact, there is every evidence to support the conclusion that man, by himself, is morally incapable of following this pattern. But why? Interlock is missing. Is this an accident or an oversight? Now, if a tiny insect could be locked into this behavior pattern, certainly an omnipotent God could have locked man into this pattern. If God had locked man into a behavior pattern, he would have robbed man of that which makes him a man. He would have robbed him of his free will and his power of choice. Instead of a behavior interlock, God has provided for man something infinitely more wonderful. God offers to link man to himself in a warm, personal, vital relationship. The possibility of this relationship is the ultimate, the crowning difference between man and animal. This hunger in the heart of man to know God is universal. In some parts of the world, this God hunger is brutally suppressed. In others, men try merely to ignore it. But this basic need in the heart of man is universal.
I'm not going to add too much to what he said. I've talked about that before, where he's talking about how God could force man into being locked into the mode of being that he wants from us, or however you want to put that. And the rebuttal is always the same. Even if you're not a religiously oriented person, it's like you all understand this on some level. Imagine if you had a boyfriend or girlfriend that had to control you so thoroughly. And I don't mean in some new age sense, like baseline respect is controlling, but I mean like a legitimately controlling partner. Like, what is the implication of that perspective that they have? Well, the implication is that they don't trust you, that they think you're bad or you're going to do something wrong. And the same is true with like a tyrannical government. It's based on a presupposition that they have to use force or violence or deception or quelling or domestication or whatever to keep you in line because you're fundamentally irredeemable, right? So on some level, it's based on disdain for mankind and a lack of trust in mankind. And if God is real and he loves you and he forced you to be a certain way, he would be simultaneously admitting those something similar about you. And not only that, but beyond that, it's like if someone programmed your brain to be like an android to do the right thing, then doing the right thing kind of loses its merit, right? You didn't deliberately choose right action over wrong action. And that's kind of what I've been advocating for on this channel forever. Like, that's sort of where we need to be. It's like, and I don't expect people to be perfect, but it's just like, we have to get to a place where our hearts want what's right as much as humanly possible, and where we deliberately choose right over wrong. And to love, there's that Bible verse, it's like, men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. We need to come to a place where we love light rather than darkness. And I'm not necessarily telling you to convert or something. I just want you to think about that, okay? I just thought it was appropriate how he was describing the insect society and what he feels like its opposite is, or what its antidote is. So anyways, guys, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think.